Well, today is a little chat with Marco Buongiorno Nardelli. Awesome name. But beyond that, he's also really an awesome researcher in the area of physics and material chemistry and science, and using that stuff to generate music. It's really pretty fascinating, but you're definitely going to want to check out the website, his website, in order to learn more about exactly what he's doing. So for that, you're probably going to want to head over to the podcast website, which is artmusictech.libsyn.com. And I'll have links for all of his stuff right there. Enjoy this talk with Marco. Okay, today I have a very special guest. His name is Marco Buongiorno Nardelli. I think I said it right. Did I say that right, Marco?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, fantastic. Marco is a research professor at the University of North Texas. And he also works with the IARTA group, the Initiative for Advanced Research and Technology in the Arts. I first got introduced to him through David Stout, who said, you might want to talk to this guy and see if there's a way that you can help out. And I did, and I was fascinated by the project. So rather than me tell you what it's about, I'm going to have Marco do that. So first of all, hi, Marco. How are you?
Hey, Darwin, very well, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, I'm really happy to have you, and I'm really excited to kind of share your work with other people. So in that spirit, could you tell everybody what it is that you are actually working on?
Okay, my project is called Material Sound Music. That is also the name of the website where you can find more information about it. And broadly speaking, it has to do with the sonification of scientific data, but in a context that blends, say, the scientific aspect to the artistic aspect of making music out of this process. So sonification by itself is a not much explored alternative to visualizing data. You know, you have large amount of data, you typically do a plot, or you do a drawing or something that shows you where the data are in some grid of points. But that's not the only way you can actually kind of perceptualize your data. You can transform this data into sound events and then use your hearing rather than your vision to make sense of the data. And this is something that comes from, originally from my research interests that are in material science and particularly in the development of databases of material properties that are all computed theoretically with high-performance computing tools. So we have large codes that we write, we develop the theories, then we run these huge codes, we get a lot of data. These data are organized in a database. Our database is called aflowlib, and it's public. You can go there and play with it if you want to. And there you can find computed data for now almost 1 million of different materials. Metals, ceramics, insulators.
Right. So what is
numbers?
Right. So what is it that you're actually trying to sonify then? Do you sonify the materials themselves, or do you try sonifying how they interact with each other? What is it?
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is I'm choosing some particular properties of the material, the one that are actually related to the fact if a material, say, conducts electricity or not. So if a material conducts electricity, it's called a metal. If it doesn't, it's an insulator. And you can get this kind of information from a specific set of data that is called the electronic band structure. That is basically a mapping of what energies an electron can have inside of your system or cannot have inside of the system itself.
Sure.
And so I start with that particular kind of information, and what is related to this information is a sort of a histogram of this data that tells me how many occurrences of the same energy for an electron I have in the system. I mean, maybe it's a difficult concept to kind of explain in simple words. It's a very quantum mechanical thing that is at the basis of the behavior of materials in general. So,
well, that's really interesting, and I want to get into that a little more. But the first thing I want to get into, because you're kind of blowing my mind here, is typically in my podcast, what I do is I try and get people to tell me how they became the artists that they are. And you're in kind of a unique position because you are simultaneously an artist and a researcher, a scientific researcher. And
yes.
So my sense of what your background must be, I can't even imagine. How does a person get to be a research physics professor and an accomplished musician and composer all at one time? How does that happen?
As my wife says, sometimes not sleeping. But it's not true. I actually sleep my nights, so it's not that. Well, my music starts when I started to study music when I was 6 years old. And I always had a great, it was my passion, has been always my passion. And I actually, the first connection between music and numbers, if you want, so it's not really music and science, but at least a kind of a mathematical view of music, comes from those years, because I actually I studied with a conductor and choir director in Rome, Pablo Colino, who was using a method that actually started with numbers. With the kids, so we were actually reading numbers rather than reading notes on the staff.
I see.
To learn music.
Okay.
So that association is really very old. It's been from the very beginning. Now, my father was also a scientist, so I've been exposed to science all my life. And this inquiry, the power of inquiry and discovery, was always part of my upbringing. So that's, I decided to become a physicist basically at the end of my high school. I really didn't know what I wanted to be, but definitely music was an important part of my life. And then physics became an important part of my life. Actually, at the end of high school, I wanted to get into the conservatory in Rome for composition and conducting, and I actually got admitted to the program. So I was admitted at the conservatory in Rome, but the situation of the conservatory itself was very bad. I mean, classes were overcrowded. Eventually I went to become a physicist and became a physicist. Then I always kept my music. I moved to the US after my PhD. And I started to collaborate with various groups and instrumentalist friends of mine in North Carolina. We formed various bands. We played jazz for many years. We eventually produced a record also for Parma Recordings. It's called Morning Moon, and it's available on Amazon, iTunes, wherever. And then I moved here to North Texas, and as you know, North Texas is an amazing music school.
Indeed.
And a lot of people that are very interested in putting together art, science, technology, and all these things. And so these two interests, music and science, I had an illumination, something that happened. I thought, well, maybe I can do something with this and combine these two areas in something that is really one single product. And this is the genesis of this project.
Okay, so prior to going to North Texas, you didn't really mix your science and your music together?
Well, of course, in my composing activities, I've always been very, I wouldn't say scientific, but I use a lot of mathematical concepts. My compositions are often kind of abstract and use mathematical structures underlining the composition of the piece. But I never used actual scientific data inside my music before. So that's actually a first experience.
Just touching base on that a little bit. So, because I think a lot of people are always looking for new ways to consider an approach to composition. And so, what are some of the mathematical tools you might have used to do composition work?
One of I mean, my main kind of underlying theme of my composition is the use of set theory, and not necessarily in a serialist way, so not necessarily 12-tone rows, but use operation on sets to produce raw materials that then I can put into a composition. So I use a lot of kind of the typical operations that you can do on list of numbers to produce the basis for the actual composition.
Sure, that makes sense. And actually, it's kind of an interesting thing. I was recently I went and spent some time with some kids at a local STEM school that had a music program. And the music teacher, his name's Greg Kennedy, really a fantastic guy. One of the things that he was doing was he was having them write songs about math, right? Mm-hmm. And so they were writing a song about the number pi. And they were like, well, Mr. Gross, what could we do to do something extra interesting in the song? And I was like, well, I know that you know musical intervals. What if you take the numbers in pi, 3.1415, and what if you use those as a melody? And they had never really thought about that because for them, they learned notes first and then numbers. So I think it's really interesting, first of all, that your earliest musical stuff was sort of like
numbers,
music as numbers, because that seems to me, for me working with Max, that's how we think of
music.
Music and sound and video and everything. It's just we reduce everything into numbers, mess with the numbers, and then turn it back into music or visuals or whatever.
In fact, I think one of the underlying things of my project, the things that I actually internalized out of this is that eventually every music is a stream of data.
Right.
And so this realization is at the core of this project in a way, because I have data that I can stream, and these streams of data can become music if I do something with them. They might be just music already in the act of mapping those stream of data to stream of notes or stream of frequencies or stream of musical events. So from this kind of a sonification only idea, I developed what I call the computer-aided data-driven composition environment.
Sure.
Where I can use data that, in my case, come from my databases of materials property, but in principle can come from everywhere.
Right.
So they are not bound to be something specific. They can be scientific data, statistical data, whatever. But make this into a process that eventually produces a composition.
Sure. So one of the questions I have is, and one of the things I'm always curious about is how people make the decisions that they make, right? And it seems to me when you're working with these huge databases, one of your responsibilities as a composer is to choose what data to pay attention to and what data you can ignore, right?
Well, that and I think the highest level of responsibility that you have as a composer after this first choice is the conscious choice that you do in encoding this data in a musical way. So
right.
I have the advantage being a materials physicist that I know my data.
Good point.
I know exactly how they look. I know exactly what I can do with them. But I mean, just to give you a sense of this, the data I'm talking about are typically two-dimensional plots. So, kind of a square where you have many lines. So they are intrinsically kind of polyphonic data.
Okay.
Because you have more than one line that goes on. So if you think musically, you can think as many different voices in a composition. And so once I decided that the set I want to use, that I can go in my database and the composition, the first piece that I have on my website is this the composition is called Music for 88 Keys, and the data for that composition come from the diamond, zinc oxide, and gold. So these are the three materials that from where I took the raw data that I then manipulated and modified and composed in order to have this piece.
Sure.
Yeah. But the real first step that you do, that is after you decide which data you want to sonify in a way, the mapping is the first choice. How do you map the numbers into notes?
Yeah, that was actually the word I was going to use, is the sense that, more than just making decisions, what you really have to do is you have to create a map, or, like a conversion map of data to sound or data to music.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to imagine how this works. And I've done stuff with sensors, and you get a specific kind of data out of sensors. And a lot of times you'll smooth it or you'll tweak it to make it so that it kind of lies into the musical sphere a little better. How much do you have to tweak this stuff, or how much do you want to avoid it because it's also kind of this scientific path? I mean, when I'm doing stuff with a sensor, I use the sensor, but I'm also primarily concerned about making a musical piece, right?
Yes.
In your case, you are trying to make a musical piece, but you're also trying to reveal something about the data, right?
Yes, and so there are two aspects here. One is if I want to use this sonification in order to explore the data set in a scientific way. And the other one is if I want to start from here and write a piece of music.
I see, right.
And these are two different levels,
right?
I think that belong to this kind of sonification problem or sonification issue. So if I want to do something that I want to use for, say, data mining of the database, I have to define what I call the data sound identifier. That is a sound or a set of sounds that are specific to that material.
Right.
And then out of the analysis of the different data sound identifiers from different materials, I can draw correspondence. Different materials may have similar properties because their sounds are similar.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I'm doing in, say, the scientific sense. Use sonification really as an alternative to either visualization, but even more as a way of data mining the database. I actually had a conversation, an email exchange with one of the chief engineers at Pandora, because I was interested to see if they could participate to this kind of search algorithm for sounds that are similar. Unfortunately, They can't because they don't have the resources. But the idea, I think, it's very appealing now to find a way of using sound to make sense of data. And so this has a huge influence on the scientific visualization and beyond of large big data sets.
Right. Now, it actually makes sense to me too, because there's something about working with sound that tends to work at more of a subconscious level than visuals do. Visuals are very much, you're consciously looking at them and you're consciously trying to do your pattern recognition. It seems like sound, oftentimes, the pattern recognition that you get with sound is something that occurs on a subconscious level. You hear something, you feel that something is repeating before you hear it repeating, for example.
Yeah, and unfortunately, from the point of view of the research, we are not trained enough yet to use sound as our main driver.
Right.
But because it requires training, and we've been trained to see graphs since kindergarten. No?
Sure, of course.
This is this graph, this is the other graph. You plot the data in this way, but nobody teaches you to hear the data in different ways.
Right. So have you done much yet where you've gotten like non-musician scientists to sort of like listen to the stuff and see if they could garner any useful information? I mean, is your research including the human aspect of it, or is it mostly focused on the data right now?
No, right now I'm focusing more on the development of the tools and the infrastructure, but I'm testing on myself.
Sure.
That is kind of a biased testing because I know what I'm doing, but I can tell you that the results that I see are very promising. I mean, I define this data sound identifier as a particular sound that maps one of this data spectrum that I have. This what I was mentioning, this kind of histogram.
Right.
That is unique for each material.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm mapping this to the 88 keys of the piano. And each key has a velocity, so an amplitude, the sound is associated with the amplitude of the signal of this histogram. So the sound that you hear out of this, even from materials that have very similar histograms, is distinguishable. It's actually more distinguishable in the sound than in the plot.
Than in the plot of a graph, sure.
Graph. You hear it very distinctively.
Uh-huh.
And this is very interesting to me because I think it opens up an avenue towards this use of sound in the scientific inquiry.
Right.
Now, that's completely different from what I do then afterwards for the in creating a musical piece, because I use some of this information. And particularly, one of the first mapping that I devised is a mapping in which each value of this data is mapped to a MIDI note between 21 and 108, so the 88 keys of the piano again.
Right.
Each velocity of the MIDI event corresponds to the velocity of the histogram, so that the amplitude of the sound of each note is the amplitude that I get out of the scientific graph, so that each note is consistently played at an amplitude that corresponds to the scientific data.
Sure.
And the duration of the MIDI event is a measure of the variation of the data. So if the data varies very fast, the duration, so in this mapping that I'm talking about, is longer actually. If the data varies very little, then the notes are very fast.
Okay, so what that's going to do then is it's going to tend to like make you really aware of fast movement because it's going to be longer and more discernible notes.
Yes, and this also will make you aware of the way in which the data varies.
Right.
So if it increases, then you will have an increase in the pitch, and then if it decreases, you have a decrease in the pitch, and depending on this histogram, it might be louder or softer.
Right.
Depending on the region of the notes where they are, and the duration will tell you something about how fast the notes, how fast this data are varying.
Sure.
Now, this is clearly the raw data.
Right.
Then after you do this, it's all up your creativity basically. So basically, what I do, I have this data that I compile in kind of spreadsheet. You can do it on a spreadsheet. You can do it within Max. You can do it using command line, Linux, Awk, Sed, Python, everything. And you start to manipulate this data. You can repeat section. You can invert the order. You can reverse. You can invert. You can multiply. You can mix, you can randomize, the number of operations you can do is infinite, basically.
Yeah, well, again, it kind of like points back almost to a serialist like data set, right?
Yes, but basically it's in a way you can call it as an extended data-driven serialism.
Right.
Where at the end, though, you use every pitch, every it's not just limited to a set class,
right.
but you use everything.
Sure.
And actually, what is very interesting is the fact that the data have an internal structure everywhere, anyway. So you can actually start to exploit the internal structure, even in a live performance. So I have one of the instances of my apps where I can take the live stream of data using Max. I actually use Max and Max for Live, so that I use Live, Ableton Live for most of the sound production.
Okay.
and Max for all this manipulation of the data.
Oh, okay.
And so while the data are actually flowing, you can operate on them and change the way in which the sound is produced. And it's very interesting because it's kind of an improvising over a data stream.
Yeah, so the tool set then, first of all, how do you get the data from this huge database?
Okay, the database is public, is online. In principle, you could interrogate the database automatically. In practice, right now, I mean, if you have access directly to the database, you can do it in an automatic way. If you do it through the web portal, then you access one material at a time.
Right.
But the database has everything, has all the files with this data that you can download. Okay. And then I have written a suite of Python scripts that are the engine, if you want, of the data extraction. So you extract the data and you do the mapping into MIDI events in these Python codes. And then the MIDI events are fed into Max, where everything is put together.
Oh, and then Ableton Live there is...
And Ableton Live is used to manage the synth. Basically.
Okay, yeah, the instruments and the effects and
the instruments and the effects are managed by Live.
Right, okay. Well, that makes sense, and that's interesting. It's an interesting combination of tools because it's kind of a current thing. I mean, we talk about how, you've been trained to use graphs since you were in kindergarten, but the idea of using sound or music as a measuring device is something that you're just now kind of bringing together. To what extent do you think that it's important that these tools exist before you could even take it on? I mean, one of the nice things about this tool set that you're talking about, not only can it manage the numbers pretty well, but it can also sound pretty good too, right?
Yes.
And so, I would think that when you're spending the time doing this, and especially when you're going to introduce this to the scientific community, it would certainly be helpful if it sounded good, right?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, this combination, I mean, I tried other things before, but I think this combination, gives me all the freedom of the creative process. That is the way in which I compose. That is very abstract, as I was saying, and in a way mathematical, if you wish, without having to worry too much about developing the sound tools that make this composition sound nice.
Right.
So I think this composition that I have on the website that was recorded recently.
This is the music for 88 keys.
For 88 keys, yes. That was recorded in the studios of the University of Texas Dallas ATEC department, Art, Technology, and Emerging Communication, with the help of Scott Gresham Lancaster, who's a professor and a very good friend of mine.
Right.
And a super expert in electronic music. So I'm fortunate I've met him.
Sure.
The composition is for player piano and electronics. So the player piano is also managed by Live as an external instrument. And so all my apps basically are plugins for Live written in Max that manage all these voices and all these data streams that come in, that modify the data stream. You can use them. In this case of music for 88 keys, the material is pre-composed mostly. It's not a live improvisation on the data stream. But I'm working on other pieces where this is more kind of a performance act, where you have this data stream and you modify it live in performance.
All right, well, that's pretty fascinating what you've done. And again, for those people that are listening and want to check this out, your site, www.materials, that's with a S, soundmusic.com, has a bunch of information. It's got pictures of what your tool set looks like. It's got the ability to play the music in this Music for 88 Keys piece. Now, one of the things, though, when I look at this, and particularly when I look at, what page is it? Yeah, the media page. You have a picture of what looks like a kind of a rendering of a space age atomic walk-through kind of environment.
Yes.
I mean, that kind of implies that you have really big plans for this kind of data work.
This is like my dream. My dream is that eventually I would really like to build this kind of spaces, immersive spaces that give the sense of what a material actually is. We have all this, knowledge of the universe, the stars, the moon, the solar system, because we've been going to planetariums for ages. We don't have anything like this for a crystalline material. And so I would really like to build this and use this as the performance space for this music, so kind of making an immersive environment where you hear and you see at the same time what this data and this information is in a full kind of immersive setting. So that's my dream. We'll see if we can do it.
Yeah, it would be like an auditorium for this particular kind of music and display.
I mean, you can think about, on a stage you can build this and have the piano and the loudspeakers, so the performance eventually that play this music in this environment.
Right. So beyond this immersive space, what do you see as the future for this kind of sonification of data? Where do you see it drawing you?
Well, I mean, I have to say that my main passion is to use this to write more music, more of my music. But I clearly see how we could drive this, and I see that there are very many parallel efforts in sonification of data, scientific data, that are happening right now, that eventually we will be able to construct a framework where sound is at least one of the drivers for the data mining of scientific data.
That's really fantastic, and I think that that's yet another one of those examples where the arts really can have an influence in ways that people never imagined.
Thank you.
So, Marco, I want to thank you very much for spending the time telling us a little bit about your work and about your background. It was really fascinating, and I really hope that you have a lot of success in pulling this together and getting some attention for what you're doing, because I think it seems really important for a lot of reasons.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and I really think that, podcasts like yours are very important for making these projects known to the public, and I thank you for this.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
All right.
All right. Bye. And there you have it, the interview with Marco. What a roller coaster ride. That's amazing. So again, if you want to check out his work, it's www.materials, that's with an S, and then soundmusic.com. It's all one word, materialssoundmusic.com, where you're going to be able to find examples of the music, pictures of his proposed installation, the opportunity to see him presented in a video to other researchers. A lot of interesting information there. I know that a lot of people are into visualization, and sonification may be the next place this stuff goes. I think it's really great to kind of keep an eye on where this stuff is going. Hope you enjoy it. If you do, tell your friends, family. If you didn't like it, I don't care. Still tell your friends and family. But thanks a lot for listening, for keeping up the listenership. I just really enjoyed doing this for you. I hope you enjoy listening. Thanks a lot, and have a great week.